Jacob Riley had been a solitary man for most of his life. His ranch, nestled in the vast plains of the Wild West, had always been his companion, as he worked tirelessly to raise cattle, fix fences, and tend to the land. His days were long and his nights were quiet, save for the sound of the wind sweeping across the prairie. At 35 years old, Jacob had come to terms with his lonely existence. He had no family, no friends close enough to call his own, and no woman to share his life with. But that was about to change. A few months ago, Jacob had made a decision. He had heard of mail-order brides, women from the East, seeking a fresh start in the West. After weeks of searching through letters and photographs, he'd settled on a woman named Sarah. Her picture was beautiful, with soft, warm eyes and a smile that could light up even the darkest room. They had written to each other for weeks, sharing stories, hopes, and dreams for a future together. Jacob felt a spark of hope deep inside him for the first time in years. Perhaps after all this time, he wouldn't have to live alone anymore. As he waited for Sarah's arrival, Jacob kept himself busy with his usual work. But there was a sense of restlessness inside him. He would catch himself glancing at the horizon, hoping to see the stagecoach carrying his bride. His heart raced with excitement, yet anxiety clung to him like the dust on his boots. What if she didn't like him? What if she didn't live up to the picture in his mind? Still, he pushed those worries aside. He had promised to make a life with her, and he would keep that promise. The days stretched on, and with each passing one, Jacob's excitement grew. He had prepared the small cabin, cleaned the windows, and even bought some flowers to put in a vase. He wanted everything to be perfect. The evening the stagecoach was supposed to arrive, Jacob stood outside his cabin, his eyes fixed on the trail. The sun had begun to set, casting a warm golden glow over the land, and he knew it wouldn't be long now. But as the sound of hooves echoed in the distance, Jacob's heart skipped a beat. This was it. He could see the cloud of dust rising in the air, signaling the arrival of the coach. His breath quickened as the stagecoach came into view. His bride was finally here. But the figure that stepped off the coach wasn't quite what Jacob had imagined. Instead of the delicate, refined woman he had envisioned, a rugged woman with wild, untamed hair and a scar across her cheek stood before him. She was dressed in dark, weathered leather, with a rifle slung across her back and a pistol at her side. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the ranch, her movements confident and swift. Jacob froze for a moment, unsure of what to make of the situation. He had been expecting Sarah, but this woman, this stranger, was nothing like the picture he had formed in his mind. She took a step forward, and without introduction, spoke. "I need shelter. I've been on the run for days and I can't go any farther. You'll have to let me in." Her voice was steady, calm, and full of authority. Jacob stood in the doorway, his mind racing. An outlaw? Was she part of some gang? Or was she a simple traveler who had gotten lost in the wilderness? He couldn't tell, but one thing was clear: this wasn't the woman he had been waiting for. "Who are you?" Jacob asked, his voice steady but cautious. He didn't know whether to be afraid or simply confused. The woman glanced at him and then at the cabin, a look of determination in her eyes. "Name's Cassidy. I'm not here to cause trouble, but I need a place to stay for the night. I've been running from some folks who want me dead." Jacob hesitated. His hand instinctively reached for the door, ready to shut it. But something in Cassidy's eyes made him pause. There was no fear in her gaze, only a kind of weary resolve. She wasn't here to rob him, that much he could tell. She was simply looking for shelter, and he couldn't turn her away. "All right," Jacob said, his voice quieter now. "You can stay for the night. But you'll have to leave come morning." Cassidy didn't argue. She simply nodded and stepped inside, taking off her dusty boots and rifle as she crossed the threshold. The warmth of the cabin hit her like a wave, and for a moment she closed her eyes, allowing herself a brief moment of rest. Jacob watched her, still unsure of what to make of her. He had never expected this. He had thought he would be opening the door to a future with Sarah, but instead he was welcoming a woman who seemed as dangerous as the wild terrain itself. Cassidy didn't waste time. She quickly sat by the fire, pulling out some food from her pack. Jacob sat across from her, unsure of what to say. The silence between them was thick, and the flickering firelight made the shadows dance on the walls. "So what's your story?" Jacob finally asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. Cassidy took a bite of her bread and looked up at him, her eyes intense but not unfriendly. I was part of a gang, one of the best, in fact. But things went south. Betrayal, greed, and a whole lot of blood. I got out when I had the chance. Now I'm just trying to survive." Jacob listened in silence, trying to process the words. Cassidy's life had been far from simple, and she wasn't the kind of woman he had imagined his bride would be. But there was something about her story that intrigued him. She wasn't here for riches or power. She was here for something else, something that was far more complicated than he had ever known. The fire crackled in the corner, the only sound in the room. Jacob's thoughts raced, his mind turning over the strange situation. He wasn't sure what he'd expected when he first agreed to the mail-order bride arrangement. But this was something he had never even considered. "Well," Cassidy said after a moment, her voice softening, "I guess I'll take the corner by the fire if that's all right. I've got a long road ahead of me and I need all the rest I can get." Jacob nodded slowly. "You can stay as long as you need to. Just don't make a habit of it." He wasn't sure if he meant it as a warning or simply as a polite formality, but Cassidy didn't seem to mind. She lay down by the fire, her eyes closing as she finally allowed herself to relax. Jacob watched her for a while, his thoughts drifting to Sarah. Was she still on her way? Would she arrive tomorrow as planned? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but for the moment, he had more pressing things to worry about, like the outlaw lying in his cabin, looking like she might never leave. As the night stretched on, Jacob lay awake, the weight of the situation heavy on his chest. In his mind, he tried to envision the future, his future with Sarah. But for now, all he could focus on was the present, with Cassidy, the outlaw woman, curled up in front of the fire. The morning after Cassidy arrived, Jacob woke early, as he always did. The soft glow of dawn filtered through the small windows of the cabin, and the air was crisp with the chill of the early hours. He could hear the sound of the horses outside, their hooves softly tapping against the earth as they moved about. The routine of the ranch calmed him, but there was an unusual tension in the air that day, something he couldn't quite shake. Cassidy was still asleep by the fire, her dark hair tangled around her face and her breathing steady. Jacob watched her for a moment, still uncertain about the stranger who had unexpectedly entered his life. The outlaw, as she had called herself, had been a surprising presence in his quiet world. He couldn't help but wonder about the life she had lived, what kind of person she was, and why she had chosen this path. The silence between them the night before had been thick, filled with unasked questions and quiet understanding. Jacob didn't know if she was a threat or just a woman who had been caught up in the wrong circumstances. But something in her eyes made him feel that she wasn't dangerous to him, at least not in the way he had first imagined. She wasn't here to rob him or take his land. She was just trying to survive like everyone else. Jacob decided to get to work. He needed to check on his cattle, make sure everything was running smoothly. The ranch had always been his responsibility, and he wasn't about to let a visitor, no matter how unexpected, keep him from his duties. As he prepared to leave the cabin, Cassidy stirred. She blinked slowly, stretching out like a cat, before pushing herself up from the floor. "Morning," she said, her voice still husky from sleep. "Morning," Jacob replied, not knowing what else to say. Cassidy stood up, rubbing her eyes, and walked over to the stove. She wasn't much of a guest, but Jacob wasn't sure what he was expecting. She had come to him out of nowhere after all. She didn't seem interested in the niceties, and she wasn't exactly the type to sit idly by while someone else worked. "I'm coming with you," she said, a confident look in her eyes. Jacob raised an eyebrow. "What for?" Cassidy shrugged, picking up her rifle and slinging it across her back. "You're not going anywhere without me. You said I could stay, but that doesn't mean I'm just going to sit here all day. I've got my own reasons for being here." Jacob hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but I can't have you causing trouble. I've got to check on the cattle and the fences." "I won't cause trouble," Cassidy promised, though her smile suggested she was far more capable of trouble than he might expect. Together, they headed out into the cold morning, the ranch stretching out before them. Jacob could feel Cassidy's presence behind him as they walked toward the corral. Her movements were quick and precise, her eyes scanning the surroundings with a sharpness that made Jacob feel as though she was always on alert. It was strange walking alongside someone who had been a stranger just the night before, but somehow it felt natural, like she had always been part of the land, as though she had always been there. As they reached the cattle, Jacob began his usual inspection, checking for any signs of illness or injury. Cassidy stood to the side, watching him with an intensity that made Jacob self-conscious. He wasn't used to anyone looking over his shoulder, but he didn't mind her presence. She seemed genuinely interested in the work, even though she didn't say much. "You ever worked on a ranch before?" Jacob asked, breaking the silence. Cassidy shook her head, her eyes still scanning the cattle. "Not exactly, but I know how to survive."
That's what matters most, right?
Jacob couldn't argue with that. Survival was something he understood all too well. The land didn't care who you were or what you'd done in the past. It only cared about what you could do to make it through another day. "Fair enough," he muttered, getting back to work. As the day went on, Jacob couldn't help but notice how efficient Cassidy was. Despite her past as an outlaw, she had an uncanny way of handling herself. She moved with purpose, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, ready for anything. She had a sharpness about her that Jacob admired. He hadn't expected her to be so capable. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and by mid-afternoon they had finished checking the cattle. Cassidy, however, didn't seem in any rush to leave. She looked over at Jacob as he wiped sweat from his brow. "You're not bad at this," she said, a hint of respect in her voice. Jacob grunted, not sure how to respond. "I've been doing it my whole life." They started heading back to the cabin, the air still warm with the sun, but a tension hung between them. As they neared the ranch, Jacob heard the sound of hooves pounding the ground. His heart skipped a beat. He turned toward the sound, only to see a group of riders coming over the hill. Cassidy's posture immediately changed. She stood taller, her hand instinctively reaching for the rifle on her back. Jacob's heart raced. He didn't recognize the riders, but they were coming fast, and something about the way they approached made him uneasy. "Who are they?" Jacob asked, his voice low. "They're after me," Cassidy replied, her voice steady, though her eyes were sharp with concern. "I told you I was on the run. They'll follow me anywhere." Jacob's mind raced. He didn't know what to do. His first instinct was to protect the ranch and everything he had worked for. But he couldn't deny that he didn't want Cassidy to get hurt, not after everything she had done for him. The riders were getting closer now. They weren't slowing down, and Jacob could feel the tension rising in the air. Cassidy turned to him, her face serious. "You need to hide. If they find me, they'll leave you alone. But if they find both of us—" Her voice trailed off, and she didn't need to finish the sentence. Jacob didn't have time to think. He made a split-second decision, grabbing Cassidy's arm and pulling her toward the barn. They ran as fast as they could, ducking inside just as the riders rode up to the cabin. Jacob held his breath, praying that they wouldn't find them. Inside the barn, Jacob tried to calm his racing heart. He had no idea what was going to happen next. He had no idea who these men were or what they wanted with Cassidy. But one thing was clear. This was no longer just about waiting for a mail-order bride. It was about survival. As they crouched in the shadows of the barn, the sound of the riders' horses grew louder. Jacob's pulse quickened, but Cassidy placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes meeting his with a silent understanding. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, and for the first time, Jacob felt a sense of certainty in his heart. This wasn't the life he had imagined, but it was the one he was living, and he wasn't alone anymore.